and you're in pain, soothing as a springtime rain, to have a friend right in your corner, your heart will feel a little warmer. Tender loving care, tender loving care, each warm and friendly touch lets someone know you care so much. Tender loving care, tender loving care.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Greenbrier Almond, and I welcome you to our program, Tender Loving Care. As you see, I'm wearing a shirt that has a picture of Mickey Mouse, and that's for a purpose. As I learned in 4-H when I was a little boy, giving talks and demonstrations, everything that we do should serve a purpose. So I'm going to be talking about Walt Disney today as an example of visionary leadership. And I want to talk about visionary leadership because we're selecting a president of the United States here in about a month or so. And certainly one of the things that we expect of a president is that they will have a visionary leader. It will be a visionary leader. They'll know the direction our country needs to go. And I remember in VA one time when I was a doctor there, and we were taking various leadership classes from time to time to be service chiefs. Someone gave a talk about how, like a army moving through a jungle, the leader would have to climb the trees and look out across the jungle and then decide what direction that the army should go. And so the joke, they made a joke at the time, the person giving the talk, would be that someone climbed the tree and found out they had climbed the wrong tree. And so that would be, we don't want that kind of leadership, do we? We want them to climb the right tree, we want them to look into the future and to be visionary. But this is just one of those things that are happening, a presidential election. This is a good time to talk about leadership for a lot of reasons. And this is a great book. I'm going to be talking about using this author, Pat Williams, who started the Orlando Magic organization. And of course, there's the Magic Kingdom. But he went down to Florida after Walt Disney had already gone there, and he wanted to develop a sports team in a small town that didn't have an NBA franchise, and he wanted to. He had to build a sports stadium and from scratch. And so he himself, Pat Williams, has great leadership ability and is a motivational speaker. And this book is a fascinating read. And I'm just using this as an example to talk from today, because as we talk about that interface between Christianity and medicine, one of the things that I think we can count on that. By studying the Bible, there also are great leaders that we can know about. And then if you study medicine or even look in your community here in Buchanan, there are leaders who are physicians who have, by way of their education, their training, their disposition, certain leadership skills. But the first one to talk about, that is the first trait to talk about, is vision. Where there is no vision, the people perish, the Bible says. And Walt Disney said, if you can dream it, you can do it. So he was a great one to dream. He even had his, he said he wanted his workers, the people working with him, to have imagination and then to have engineering skills. So Imagineers, he called them. So he even created a new word, but the characteristic would be, if you can dream it, you can do it, Walt Disney said. So let me talk a little bit about this. And by the way, if you want to read more by Pat Williams, he wrote 2 other books about Walt Disney, which were best-selling, Go for the Magic and How to Be Like Walt. So besides this book called 21 Great Leaders, there are other books out there. Well, Walt Disney's life can be summed up in several different ways, but one of the close associates of his, Dick Nunis, N-U-N-I-S, Nunis, wrote down several characteristics, and he summed it up this way. Walt had integrity. You could trust him. So any type of a leader that we want to elect, or we want to, if you're going to a doctor, it's a matter of trust. When I was practicing medicine, I figured it out early that I'm there to listen to people, maybe to examine them, order the right test, offer treatment. But what I had going for me was trust. The patient had to trust me as their doctor. Otherwise, they should get another doctor. Now, there are, of course, doctors will do their exams, they'll come to a conclusion, they'll offer treatment, and people will say, I want a second opinion. And insurance companies actually encourage that and pay for that. And sometimes that's a good idea, especially if major surgery is contemplated, and there might be an alternative treatment that would work just as well. But it's a matter of trust, and Walt Disney had that with the people he worked with. He said, his own people said you could trust Walt. A second characteristic is to see the future, to be a visionary. Now, it's not the same as that any of us can see, not see what's going to happen for sure. But as Walt Disney projects, it's knowing how to make that future happen. Walt was, in creating Disney World, which is a huge entertainment complex, the #1 spot in the world for people to come for entertainment. I have visited there several times with my family over the years, and as we stood in line going to our next ride, there would be people in front of us from Brazil, there'd be people behind us from Syria, there would be a Japanese, there would be Chinese. In other words, the whole world is there with you, and they have different Epcot Center. They have different world centers represented. From Algeria to Canada, to France, all around the world, Morocco. All those are represented in Epcot, and so it is a place the world comes to, and that's due to the vision of Walt Disney. A fourth characteristic of Walt was he was a great motivator, and of course, without being motivated, that's people will not succeed. As a parent, I was always interested in motivating my children. I wanted my children to grow up to have a drive and to have a vision and to believe in themselves and to be motivated. And I think that's sometimes lost today when kids don't have chores, they don't have maybe a parent standing behind them saying, let's do that project, we can climb that mountain, we can do other things together. That's something that motivates them. Our son, Rance, and I climbed Angel Falls, a trail beside Angel Falls in Yosemite National Park. And to me, that was a motivating moment for him and for me, to see how well he could climb and how he did not give up. And we made it to the top. And it was a spectacular view, several thousand feet above the canyon, the valley wall, the valley below, and Yosemite was just a wonderful place. But climbing that mountain together was a motivator for us. A fifth is to be bold, to be a risk taker, but only take calculated risk. I don't know if I read it in this story, but another story of Walt Disney would be that his own people around him said, you can't do some of these things, Walt. And he actually cashed in his own life insurance policy to get money to do what he wanted to do. And his brother Roy was his business partner throughout. And he finally got Roy to commit to $10,000 in the beginning. And he knew that he could count on Roy to come with more money. And the Walt Disney Organization had more money, but everything was a calculated risk. And when they went down to Disney World to develop it, they were already having the experience of building Disneyland in California, and they were aware that they had not had enough land around it so that they could control the environment around them. So that they bought up 43 acres, 43 square miles of land down in Central Florida when they started Disney World. But to be a bold risk taker is a part of being a leader and a visionary. And the sixth is to learn from everyone. This was a characteristic of how Walt managed. And I like it when someone who's purported to be a leader is willing to listen to the people behind the scenes, the people that are serving him, maybe in his roles. And I think we need to consider everyone equal, and certainly that's part of the American ideal too. But to learn from everyone. A seventh characteristic, as Walt was described, was he would be able to invite people to challenge his ideas so that he could eventually improve his own ideas. I think Abraham Lincoln was a great leader in part because as he was elected president, he took people who had run against him, who had opposed him, and said, I'm going to give you cabinet positions. We're going to have to keep the Union together. We're going to have a great Civil War. It's going to be a very difficult time. I want every person here to be speaking their own ideas and sharpening my ideas. And so he brought his enemies, so to speak, to the table with him, and it made him a great leader, made the cabinet a very, very impressive. And that was a part of, Walt Disney apparently could do the same thing. And the eighth characteristic mentioned of Walt, but he could take every project and problem from all angles. And it's good to be able to see things from different angles. I enjoy exercise by walking, not because, there's probably other exercises that would be more exciting to do and so forth, but I can do a great deal of thinking while walking, and I can look at angles of problems from all sides as I go along. And it's not that one cannot do it sitting down, but there's distractions when you start to sit down. When you're moving, you sort of are cutting distractions out, I find, and it works for me. But looking at all angles is a part of leadership. One time we were making house calls with Dad, and I was an early teen, and Dad's Jeep did not have a radio, and I wanted to have a radio. I wanted to turn on music, and if I'm making a house call with Dad, I wanted to have music. And so I was complaining to him, and he said, well, I don't want a radio in the car. I want to think. Well, I want to cogitate, he said, when I'm making a house call, going out in the country. And he was solving some of the world's problems as he perceived them, thinking about all angles as he was driving up these country roads to see his patients. So that's a characteristic of a leader and a part of a visionary person. Eighth or ninth would be to be fanatically committed to excellence. I think that's the only way to go in life, and I'm very happy as I serve on the school board of Upshur County that we have a motto: expect excellence. Now, do we get excellence every time? No, we don't. But we can expect it, and that's certainly the only way to go. And part of what made Walt Disney great, according to his co-worker and best friend. So what are some things that happened to Walt Disney along the way that made him a great visionary then, or we might learn from his life? Well, he said he needed a good, hard failure early in life. And so he had to declare bankruptcy on one occasion. He was in Kansas City, Missouri, and he had an art studio, and he was drawing and so forth. He was successful to a point, but he could not sustain it. This was in the early 1920s, and maybe even another time in his life he wanted to join the service. He was very patriotic. He tried to join when he was 16, and he was underage, and they wouldn't let him join. So these are failures, if you want to say about it, but but he learned from those experiences, and he finally, of course, he even had one of his animated characters stolen from him. It would be someone just took the copyright and started using it, and without his permission, and so. But he didn't give up on that. He then later created Mickey Mouse and other characters, and was even more successful. So this is part of, we might talk about failure and learning from failure. My mother, when we were growing up, was very conservative, and so she was remembering the Great Depression when she grew up, where they didn't have any money, they had to live on the resources they had, have a big garden, wear hand-me-down clothes, and so forth. And she saw us getting away from that in the 50s and 60s, and when I was growing up, and I remember her saying, what this country needs is a good depression. And I think it's some of the same language or same thought that Walt Disney's saying when he believed that it was good sometimes to have a good, hard failure and to learn the lessons from those. Well, some of the things that he did then that made him visionary is that he was imagining things that had never been done. After he was successful, and someone might say, why not just keep going in that mold? He was making cartoon characters. He had a staff around him. He was, very popular, and he could have succeeded at that level. He imagined creating, from the Brothers Grimm, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I remember when I saw that as a young boy, because they released those movies from time to time. This was way back in the 30s when it was made. It was the first full-length cartoon series, and it had classical music, and it had all sorts of things that had never been done before. It's really unprecedented what he did. He was going where no person had gone. But that was a bold move on his part, but it was just a stepping stone. So that was going to, in fact, he had run out of money, and it was down to just a few months of production cost before he could release it, and he had to get a loan. And if that had not come through, it was a risk he was taking, but if the loan had not come through, then he would never. It would not come to production. We wouldn't know about Walt Disney today. So things like that. There are risks that we take, and when we have a vision. Other times, his ideas were thought of as a screwball. That he remembered as a child going to an amusement park, and he remembered his experience of watching a train. He grew up on a farm, and he would stand on a hill and watch the train go by. And so he had, on occasion, to go to see steam trains in Chicago, and then he imagined a train going around the Magic Kingdom as they outline how Disney World and Disneyland is set up. And so these things came out of his vision as a child, and amusement, certainly the carnival here in Buchanan is great when it comes to town for 2 or 3 days, but not anything like going to an amusement park with a real train going around the town. Though we did have the Cass Railroad come to Buchanan for the Strawberry Festival several years, and I think that was part of a vision. And we had fireworks that are more grand every year, and as they have every night at Disney World. Those things are all part of a vision that he was growing, and it was a grand vision. Now, another thing, if you're going to be a great leader, is selling the vision. As I mentioned, we have a presidential election, and we will elect someone to serve and lead our country for the next 4 years. And they're right now in a job of selling their vision of America. What is it going to be like? What do we need to do to be a great nation, to be a light on the hill, as Reagan said. And he instilled a vision in us as the great communicator back in the 80s. And he's mentioned as his leadership is mentioned that way. Selling the vision sometimes means, and it certainly was true of Walt Disney, he was described as mule-headed obstinacy. Whatever they believe, they stick to it. A great leader will be that way, and they'll be stubborn, and they won't give up their leadership. Our program, Tender Loving Care, is looking at the interface between medicine and Christianity. But my father, I always look as an example, and I marvel that how could he spend 12 years of his life, because if you think about delivering thousands of babies, half of them coming in the daytime, half at night, and maybe 10 or 12 hours of labor for each woman, how could he spend 12 years of his life awake, waiting for that baby to come? You'd have to be mule-headed, wouldn't you? You'd have to be obstinate. You'd have to be driven strongly to do that. Or to go make a house call in a blizzard, which people remember. And I went on some of those house calls myself, but other people remind me of those things. It's a little bit about being mule-headed. Or to take on, practicing medicine in the hills of West Virginia, when St. Joseph's Hospital was a house run by nuns. It was not a hospital as we commonly think about it now. The doctors, the nuns, others, developed St. Joseph's, which is a first-class hospital today, and now is a part of the university system, and continues to grow. But the early leaders, the early doctors, were mule-headed, or as that is the way that's described, that Walt Disney was mule-headed about his own decisions and where he wanted to take his projects. And he once said, if management likes my projects, he says, I seriously question proceeding. He said, if they disdain them, then I want to proceed immediately. So he even expected to be obstructed in some ways, or to be called on the carpet sometimes, but he wanted to do it anyway. I remember one time when I was chief of psychiatry at the VA, I was called on the carpet, and they said, you get a lot done because you don't obey the rules. and I wasn't going around anyone's back, but I was not giving in either, because I knew my patients had certain needs, and I was fighting for their needs. And we were taught in the VA, we had three bosses. We had, of course, the veteran, the patient themselves, and I was wanting to serve the veteran. And then we had, of course, the director of the hospital and the management staff. Those would be our bosses, so to speak. And then, of course, Congress, whoever sees the VA, would be a boss. But we had to decide who we would serve. And when I was obstinate in favor of my patients, then other people were thinking that I was breaking rules or going around rules, but I was trying to do everything for the patient. I think that's what part of Walt's visionary status. He even called his engineers and the people who drew his art and so forth, Imagineers. He came up with a new word for engineer and people who have imagination, Imagineers. The City of Tomorrow, and this is interesting, I didn't know this until I was reading Pat Williams' book and preparing for this. The Epcot Center is a wonderful exhibit. It's an experimental City of Tomorrow prototype there at Disney World, but it was going to be much bigger, except that Walt Disney died before it was built, and then it was scaled back. It was scaled back tremendously, but he was acquiring 27,400 acres there in Central Florida, and he was going to build this City of Tomorrow. And it was going to be a city. It was going to be a glass enclosed community. It was going to have totally self-reliant energy sources, everything. He imagined a lot more than what Walt Disney management built eventually. But as they said here, without Walt Disney leading the company, the visionary was gone. They could not see what he could see, and they could not imagine what he could imagine, and so they scaled back their own project because he died. And leaders are that way. Steve Jobs, certainly mentioned in his book as a leader. He built the greatest company in the world, Apple. Then he was put out of Apple by his own management. The Apple went downhill as a corporation, came back after he was invited back to be the chief again, and then it became the greatest company in the world again, and had more cash on hand than the United States government at one point. So that's the role of the leader, to have that kind of vision, taking calculated risk. But without him, when he died, then who knows what will happen to Apple, but it will not be the same corporation over time. Now, leadership lessons from Walt Disney. He said that vision is the ability to make the future happen, So someone with leadership has to have the future in mind and then make it happen. Even the President of the United States, as we elect a president, will have shared government. There's the judiciary branch, and of course there's the legislative branch and the executive branch. So you cannot make things happen in government like you can if it's a private company or a sports team or someone, one entity with one small goal in mind. But still, the vision is important to make the future happen. Certainly we would have a different future, I believe, in our nation if Kennedy had not been assassinated. It's not clear as exactly what would be different, but it would be. Or if Reagan had died when he was shot in 1981, if he died, we would not have the same nation. Would we have ended the Cold War by the end of his term, second term? I don't know. I don't think so, because he was the one who could make the future happen. And so both with someone's death or someone's life, we can see how the vision can change. Another way to think about this, according to Walt Disney, is there are dreamers and doers. But visionaries combine those functions. They're both dreamers and they are doers. So he had 4 points. I'll close on this. He said that we dream, we believe, we dare, we do. So dreaming is the first step of being a visionary. Believing is the second step. Test those dreams. And daring, taking a risk that not everyone would take, but certainly worth taking, calculated risk, and executing the dream. So in summary, Walt Disney's statement about his own visionary leadership is, everybody can make their dreams come true. It takes a dream, faith in it, and hard work. Yet the work isn't all that hard because it is so much fun, you hardly think of it as work. So a lot of times when people are having fun and working hard as a team, it scarcely will seem like work. And I have over the years marveled, say in a healthcare setting, when a nursing unit was running well, we were saving lives, we were fighting disease, but the nurses, the doctors were laughing, carrying on, banter and so forth, and feeling good about our service. We were having fun at the same time that we were fulfilling a mission. And I think that, I expect that. I like to see that. When I serve on the school board and we go into a school and there's good camaraderie, I see between the nurses, maybe the janitor, the cooks, everyone together, the teachers, the principal, then I think that the system's working well, and the vision is being carried out. So as you look toward the future now, and I brought this book 21 Great Leaders to Mind by Pat Williams. We're going to select a leader of the free world, a new president of the United States. We have to all make up our mind. We have the duty as citizens to vote. But I want you to think about a vision and what vision you want to see for America, and then think about it in terms of Walt Disney or other leaders that we've outlined here. See who could give a vision that has calculated risk that make the most sense, then we can be led forward into our own future. Well, until the next time, this is Dr. Greenbrier Allman thanking you for joining us on our program, Tender Loving Care. Special thanks to Channel 3 for this opportunity to come your way each week. And we look forward to more opportunities to talk about tender loving care.
Stories of a West Virginia Doctor, written by Dr. Harold D. Allman. A collection of 55 short stories about his experience as a small-town doctor in central West Virginia. And Tender Loving Care, Stories from a West Virginia Doctor, Volume 2, written by Dr. Greenbrier Allman, using videotapes to write 70 additional stories of his father's very colorful life as a small-town doctor. They can be found for purchase at Amazon.com and most local bookstores. Tune into Channel 3 Buckhannon for Tender Loving Care with Dr. Greenbrier Allman, where he talks about the connection between Christianity and medicine.